Welcome back to the Resupply with me, Guy Next Door, bringing your weekly double tap of all things Laserforce and Space Marines. With just over a month to go until Nationals, this week we thought it would be prudent to talk about some of the more, well, not I'd say controversial rules that govern our game, specifically Space Marines. And this week, there's no Thanatos, but I am joined by a couple of highly experienced veterans, especially when it comes to the rules of our games. I think both of these guys have had quite large input into the creation of our rule set. So this week, I'd like to welcome back to the microphone, Tragedy.
Hello.
And DK.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm all DK.
No, this is Rules Lawyer DK.
Oh, yeah, Rules Lawyer DK. We're on our best behavior. So, thanks guys for coming on and talking about this stuff, because, you know, I get asked. I'm kind of the contact, I guess, for our guys when it comes to nationals, specifically about the rules at our site. And a lot of the times I'm just like, I mean, I got a pretty good understanding of the rules, but some stuff really just throws me. So I thought it'd be a good idea to actually talk about it in relative depth. So I thought we'd start kind of with a brief overview, Traj, of what the basic rules, and then we'll get into some of the more complex stuff.
Sounds like a plan.
What do you got for me?
All right. Well, the basic rules for the most part are just more or less obvious stuff or behavior based. You know, we've got a large set of rules here that we haven't put a number on them, which is page numbers. So things like dangerous play, fencing, leaving the starting area or the playing arena. Like I said, they're behavior based. So they just govern little things that you shouldn't do while on the field. For example, climbing on and off the field. You know, you don't do anything dangerous, such as try and climb over a railing to jump off to the floor. Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been introduced as part of our game yet, so we can't use it. You know, sitting or lying down.
Yeah.
If you're going to park your bum on the field, then it's someone's going to think you've hurt yourself. So you don't try and shoot people, and they don't try and shoot you as well. So, as I said, just behavior based, little things that they're not necessarily nitpicking, but they govern, how we can play the game and play it fairly.
I suppose that they're the kind of like, so there's no arguing of somebody for whatever reason decided to climb up a wall, and you say, hey, don't climb that wall, and they say, oh, it's not in the rules or whatever. Well, actually, it is in the rules. Don't climb the wall.
Yep. And the ammo can't use the medic's gun, because it is in the rules.
Right.
Most of these had a situation at one time or other. It's like, oh, I guess we do need a rule for that.
Keep your hands on your own phases.
That's it.
Yeah.
Don't touch it, but definitely, I suppose that there's a couple of rules missing here that I know that at least Rusty want in here. Like keep your gun up. I know if he had his way, that would be a rule.
Absolutely. Always remember to get travel insurance. Rule 2B.
Yes.
The two missing rules.
So another one that's in there that I know we've had some consternation over in the past is just another kind of basic rule, the illegal language rule that we've talked about in various kinds of tournaments. Was the people saying, oh, well, we're all mostly adults. What's the big deal if we swear? And the explanation behind that, obviously, is that, one, we're still playing in a facility that is owned by other people who are running a business, and good general rule of business is don't offend your customer base by having people yell loud obscenities in the maze. But Lejeune, Jeff actually brought up a good rationale for this a couple of years ago, as well as to why this rule should be more enforced, is that when players are carrying on in a game and just swearing, we all know why we swear. It's to relieve frustration. All of us do it probably 200 plus times a day. Something happens and you start to lose your temper, and one person does it, then the next person on your team does it, et cetera, and it can spiral really quickly.
Yeah.
So if you just kind of tell everybody to conduct themselves in a somewhat more civilized manner, relatively speaking, sometimes that kind of keeps some of the other temper issues under control.
That's a good point.
One thing that almost every single nationals I attend, this comes up at least once. Obviously there's the stuff, swear words.
Werewolves, not swearwolves.
Classic. But there are things, that are a little more subtle, I guess. So things like blasphemy. Blasphemy, specifically, God damn it, gets pulled up at least once at nationals. And to be fair, I remember kind of being a stickler on this one in the past. But is that something that will kind of continue to happen? Do you guys think that should be kind of taken out? Or, I mean, it's just easier to have a blanket rule in there.
Well, its existence, I'll say its existence is my fault, really. I set up a plain English version of the rules a while ago. I think it might have been around about 2004, or it might have been a bit earlier. Because a lot of people had trouble understanding exactly what it was about. And it was probably not long before that we had played a tournament in an arena where the owners or some of the players were a lot more religious inclined than anyone else. And they were actually taking offense to people saying, God damn it, Jesus, things like that.
Yeah.
So when I wrote up the plain English version, I actually included that as a possibility towards something that could be pulled up. But realistically, as we move forward through the times, it should be revised. We should look at it and go, yeah, look, is it really that bad? Or should we just make sure we don't offend anybody?
Well, then I would need a mask because my face. Oof. No,
get me a ball gag because I'm going to need it too.
Oh, ball gag trage. So
that definitely falls under our discussion of non-standard Laserforce equipment, I
think. Especially if it's got a Fitbit in it. But we'll get to that. Okay, so yeah, like you say, maybe it's something that needs to be clarified at the start of a tournament.
And clearly there's some discretion involved here. I've always told players there's a difference between muttering "God damn it" or "shit" under your breath because you just got missiled versus screaming at your team, "God damn it, you idiots! You don't know what the hell you're doing."
Yeah. Damn you, Jesus! For bringing me this crappy resupply.
Jesus is my medic, by the way.
Hashtag Jesus is my medic. Okay, well, maybe that's something that we can. It's potentially a thing that shouldn't be as big of a deal as it is, but it happens every year. So, what else were kind of in those relatively easy to understand rules?
Well, we've got things like let's say loitering. Now, when you've been killed out of a game, you just leave the field. Full stop. Out you go. So. You walk out. You're not meant to interact with anyone else at all. Basically, in a Space Marines version, you're dead. Dead people can't talk. That's
hashtag Jesus is my medic.
Fencing. You don't knock someone else's gun and spoil their aim.
Right.
I'd mentioned before leaving the starting area or leaving the playing arena. You've got a starting area. You can't leave it till the game starts. And if the game's still going, you can't leave the arena. That's once you're out of the field, you're not part of the game. So you continue going until all is done.
Just on the loitering thing, one kind of thing that you can do is just say, I'm dead or whatever, right? It's as you're kind of moving towards the exit, as long as you're not impeding play.
Well, believe it or not, you actually can't.
Really?
Again, this is a plain English interpretation where I'd written in, you can say that you're dead. Now, the actual lettering of the rule is you have no interaction at all. I'll just find that there for you. Hang on. Loitering. Okay, player has been prematurely eliminated from a mission, received end signal, must immediately leave the playing area by the most direct route. While exiting, they may indicate to other players they've been eliminated, but no other communication or action is permitted.
Right.
Self-lawyered.
Yeah, self-lawyered. Actually, that was that was something that was written into the rule later on.
Right.
Believe it or not, the rule was the first sentence only. You must immediately leave by the playing arena. And we added that second sentence in to make it a firm, yes, you can indicate that you're dead.
Right.
But there is a reason for that. If you are just walking out of the field, or in the case of one of our Brisbane players, he actually runs from the field because it makes it look like he's still part of the game until he actually walks out the door.
I do that constantly.
I can't be bothered.
Yeah, I'm way too lazy for that.
It allows the game to continue flowing. If you've got a person who is simply walking out of the field, enemies can point their faces at them and go, this is a target, I'm waiting to shoot him, I'm waiting to shoot him, and then nothing happens. So it can take away from the action in the game. As soon as the player realises that he's dead, he can continue. The rest of the combatants continue on playing the game. What else we got? We've gone through illegal language. Swapping guns, can only use your own. Taking your equipment off, you can't do that unless you've been hurt, because if your equipment's off, you're injured, and no one else can shoot you. Yeah. Sitting or lying down, kids, keep your bum off the field. You don't need to sit down because it's too slow to get back up.
Right.
Yeah, that's a safety rule. It's too hard to get up quickly when you're sitting or laying down on the field, even with two knees. You just can't do it.
I mean, even if
physical abuse,
you've got the worms, and you're trying to like scratch your butt along the ground.
It's why God gave you fingers. You need to scratch, use your fingernails.
Right.
If you chew your fingernails, don't talk to me. Physical abuse. So you don't abuse the equipment. You don't abuse the playing field. You don't try and put holes in the walls or holes in the equipment. Everything needs to be able to work. Right. So, like I said, behaviour-based, safety-based is what the rest of the rules are, with the exception of those big 3 or 4.
Okay, well, I mean, those are all pretty self-explanatory. You guys have quite a good document that is somewhere in the tournaments page.
Yes, it should be accessible via the Files tab. I would like to find a way to make it a little bit more accessible on Facebook. But it is kind of an evolving document. I went through last year and updated it so that actually the more complex rules are at the front of the rule book, so that way people can easily look them up. Whereas I think chasing used to be like Rule 13, so people were constantly scrolling through to find out where it was.
Okay. Well, we'll put a link to it in the description of the podcast. If you have a look at that, if you want any more clarification on any of the simpler rules, but it's pretty self-explanatory. So,
yeah. If there isn't a link on LF Stats already, we can certainly put one in there. Russell can host it there.
Cool.
That would be a good place for it.
So that kind of leads us into the big 3. So first one, chasing.
All right, well, chasing is a rule that has evolved basically because Laserforce has the ability to reset other players. I don't know how many other tag systems have it, and certainly when Laserforce was first created, it was the only one where you could retag players while their suits were still deactivated. So it's a unique rule, certainly to Laserforce. Originally, the rule, believe it or not, had a 5-meter distance.
Wow.
You could follow players for up to 5 meters, but it got revised down to 3. I don't know why it was done, but it was. This is actually believe it or not, before my time in being associated with the rules.
Back when they were written on stone tablets and painted on cave walls.
Yes.
Honestly, I don't think they're that old, but I do believe it was ink and quill.
Written by Captain Cook as he got off the ship.
Thou shalt not follow.
Okay. So the rule itself says that, I should say, the way it's written does not deny access to any player for any part of the playing field. It only denies you who you're able to target, who you're able to shoot at. So if I want to run from point A to point C, and in between me is an opponent, and he's 3 meters away from me, and point C is a further 5 meters away. And I want to get to his resupply, who is sitting at point C. Now, this opponent of mine, I've shot him. He runs to his resupply. I'm allowed to run all the way along his path, be it 3 meters, 5 meters, 200 meters, all the way along. I can follow him all the way, and I can shoot his resupply. But I can't shoot him. So just because someone else has gone that distance, it doesn't mean you can't go there as well.
Right.
And that is something that trips up a lot of people, especially newcomers and those less experienced with the game. They see one person run away, they go and stop. They go, oh, I can't go there. But believe it or not, you can. You just can't shoot that guy.
No, it's
correct. And this is why you do see some of the advanced players indicate to referees as they're about to do this, not targeting tragedy, not targeting tragedy.
So
run in, shoot his resupply.
That's
run away.
important as well, right? So it's both shoot and target with your phaser.
It just says target.
Okay.
Because
it does target.
Right. Because you can be pulling for a missile or something like that. So just targeting them is enough to do the infraction.
Okay.
That's right. But it's also not just targeting the player. Now, a player can run away and they can run behind, but reflection shots can still happen. So if you're trying to get a reflection off a wall to get this particular player, you're not actually targeting him. You're targeting the wall. So the rule was again changed to prevent that sort of thing from happening as well. So I can't follow you for 3 meters, point my gun at a wall, get an actual shot on you, and get that illegal shot. So that's now covered as well. So can't target at the player, can't target their reflected IR.
Right.
Yeah, targeting is a defined term in the rules.
Right.
So
it is.
I mean, yeah, really, it's ultimately not as complex a rule as I think some people think it is. It's essentially, if someone is deactivated, you can't chase them more than 3 meters, 10 feet for you Yanks, and then target them. That's pretty much it.
Now, and follow them as much as you want, just don't target them.
Now,
and the reason the rule is worded the way it is, rather than having to take into account where the player is deactivated or something like that, this is the so-called backtrack loophole, right, where a deactivated player can run forward to set a path and then run back. The reason that exists is largely for issues of enforcement. A referee really only needs to keep track, in this case, of was the deactivated player chased, and did the chasing player target him? Right. That's all they need to know. They don't need to know where somebody got put down, what they got put down by, where they got deactivated by their own resup, none of that. So part of it also has to do with what the referees need to be able to enforce.
Okay. And obviously there's the they once they come up, they have to be up for a period of 2 seconds.
No, they do not have to be up for 2 seconds. Their path is reset 2 seconds after their lights come on.
Right, okay, so that's important.
This actually, it comes up fairly frequently in Sacramento. People are asking for clarification on this. And the reason it's 2 seconds after the lights come on is because if you come on and your resup immediately puts you back down, that doesn't prolong your path. Your path is now done.
Correct.
You came back up. You chose to get put back down. If you get put back down by a nuke or something like that, well, sad day for you, but that's how it goes.
Right. So
that's right. But that part of the rule is also only enforced if the chasing player has already gone that 3 meter distance. So the 2 seconds doesn't apply if the chasing player is only followed for 2 meters. As soon as that player reactivates, that chasing player can step right in and target the player that they followed.
Actually, on that, so to clarify, if you go 2 meters, you chase a player 2 meters along a path, then they come up, can you step past that 3 meter
and target them straight away?
Yeah.
That is correct.
Wow, okay. I guess the period of time that would happen, and, you know, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty... Yeah, that would be kind of a rare situation, I think.
If you can time it right, great.
Well, it's actually not so rare in Brisbane. Any area that's got a narrow 2-entry point corridor that leads to a resupply area, you get players who will backtrack from that area down the corridor, turn around and run away. Let's say they've gone 3.5 meters. A chasing player can also move along that corridor, hit the point that the players turned around to create their backtracking path, go for another 2 meters, wait for their suits to reactivate, and immediately run in and shoot them all.
Mm.
And it's actually not as uncommon as you would think.
Mm. That's really interesting. I don't think I ever really thought about that before. Wow. These things are good to know, kids.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, though, you are no longer following a deactivated player.
Yeah.
Their suits come back on.
Right.
That's right.
So one thing that I did get asked about this, about chasing, is obviously your path extends, 2 meters either side of you?
2 meters
Correct.
to either side, or to a permanent playing field construction. So most arenas are narrow, corridors, small rectangular sections, but there are some areas where you've got wide open spaces. And,
Chula Vista.
yeah, so it did give you the ability to track another player without chasing them, just giving them an extension to either side of their suit, and you can go around that if you need to. But it's terminated by a permanent construction, like a wall. So if you run up a corridor, a following player can run on the other side of that wall if one exists,
right,
and track you without chasing you.
So does that constitute part of your path? So one question that I got asked was, if you're standing there, you're deactivated, and you do a 360, and then you run in a direction, does that 360 area add to your path?
No, because the path extends down from your body, and chasing implies a directionality to it. Right. So they are following behind your path. So your path has a width, but it's not basically a magical sphere around you or something.
Yeah. So you do a quick 360 spin and then bolt off in a direction, and you've basically got a bubble at the start of your path.
Right. That is not correct. So.
Okay. What if you run in a small semicircle as opposed to just spin on the spot? The
person chasing you also has to run in a small semicircle.
that was actually what I was trying to do when I tripped over Hoodlum's foot in 2014.
Right, quick semicircle maneuver.
Yeah. Another important thing that sometimes people don't pick up is that to actually chase someone, you have to follow them.
Right.
You can't chase someone if they're running towards you.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah. You can't chase someone if they run in a small semicircle and you take one step to the right.
You're not doing it right.
Yeah. If you've got a rectangular room and you decide to do a big meandering left to right run, and the room's only 3 meters long on its own, but you run 6 meters to get there. The opponent is only following you for 3 meters if they run all the way to the other side of the room.
Okay. So, well, is there anything else that we need to...
Well, I'll cover the backtracking. You touched on that before. There's been some confusion as to why backtracking... It's considered a loophole, but it's really just part of the rule itself. When you move, you create a path. And you can't create... we actually have tried. You can't create part of the rule that would eliminate backtracking. I can't remember all the ins and outs of what we tried to investigate, but it just wouldn't work. So
yeah, it would make the referees gauge too much information is the other problem. Even if you could word the rule in such a way, it would be very difficult for the referees to consistently apply that.
Right.
Yep. So your forward motion creates your path. So if you run 3 meters in one direction, you've created a path in that direction. You turn around and you come back, you've created a path in a different direction. So I'm standing at point A. I've got a player at point C, which is 10 meters away. He runs towards me for a distance of 4 meters. He's running towards me. I can approach him as much as I want. Because I'm not following his path. His path is approaching me. As soon as he turns around and moves away, I have, from the point that he stops and turns around, from that point, I have 3 meters of grace where I can follow him and target him. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Once you intersect,
and that's what backtracking is.
Yes.
As soon as you cross onto where he has started his path, That is where the chasing needs to be measured from.
So if you are able, as the player potentially who would be chasing, if you're able to get in front of that player who's trying to set a backtrack, their path is just
their path is now behind you because you're not following them, they're following you.
Right. Yes. So so then you would have chased them maybe a distance of 1 or 2 meters or whatever, but you're still fine.
Yes.
Okay. And then if that player manages to, like, you stop and they overtake you again, does their follow path reset, or does it add on?
It adds up.
Okay.
It actually adds up. So if I've overtaken a player who I've followed for maybe 1 or 2 meters, let's say I followed them for 1 meter before I overtook them, and then they overtook me 3 meters away. I've followed them for a meter, and so therefore when they overtake me, the chasing doesn't start again. It actually continues. So if I then follow them for another 3 meters after that, I've actually followed them for 4 meters.
Right.
Yeah, and it's important to consider, especially in Brisbane, because there is that chase exemption zone where, correct me if I'm wrong, Traj, the way that particular chase exemption zone works is if I follow you 1 meter into the exemption zone, we come back out the other side, I only have 2 more meters that I can chase you.
No.
Or is it the other kind of zone?
It's the other kind of zone. So
okay.
With our exemption zone, which has a boundary, I won't go into it now. We'll put it up in the document when I actually upload the playing field map that I'm building.
Ooh.
The rule itself, if any part of the chasing happens outside, then all of the path is counted. So if I start following DK inside the zone, and I can follow him as much as I want inside this zone. Let's say I've gone 10 meters, in and out, round and round, and then he steps out of the bridge area onto one of the towers. We'll say he stepped out onto the red tower, which coincidentally is on the red side of the field. If I don't want to keep chasing him, if I don't want to be penalised for chasing him, I must stop and stay inside the chasing exemption zone. As soon as I take one step out, the entire path that I followed him gets counted.
Right.
Yeah, that might be a little esoteric for this discussion, so we can revisit that another time. We can edit that part out.
Yeah, it's very basic in writing. If any part of the chasing happens outside the exemption zone, the entire path is counted.
So basically, just you can follow somebody into the chase exemption zone from outside of that zone, but up to 3 meters, I guess. So if you chase them 1 meter into the zone, you could follow them another 2.
That's right.
Okay.
If it starts outside and continues in, it needs to be only 3 meters. If it starts inside the zone and moves out of it, it can only be 3 meters.
Right. So
if it is all inside the zone, none of it counts.
Best not to chase people out of that zone, I guess.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. It makes me so sad that the vortex is not the chase exemption zone, so it could be like a literal black hole in the maze where the laws of physics no longer apply.
You can do whatever you want. I would lie down and have a rest because why wouldn't you?
And another thing, you can't be penalised for chasing a player whose suit is active.
Yeah.
Yes.
You remember that?
Remember that, Spoonie.
I actually, somebody accused me of chasing them in Auckland. I'm like, dude, you're up, I'm down. I can follow you wherever I want. That's pretty funny. So, I mean, the rule really is fairly simple. I guess the thing that complicates it is the specific situations.
Yeah.
And probably the biggest thing is, and the thing that I remember the most when it comes to reffing at nationals is that, like, referees can't be everywhere and can't see everything. And so whilst you may see the end of what was potentially a longer than a 3 meter chase, you didn't see the start, and so you can't really penalize somebody for something you didn't see the whole thing of, which is a real shame, but it is what it is.
It is, but as a referee, at the end of the game, you can consult with other referees that were in the area and ask them if they saw the start of it.
Right.
And so you can collaborate after a game and penalise a player for a chase. If you only saw 1 metre of it, someone else might have seen 2 metres of it.
Yeah.
And together you can put the story together and say, right, yes, that guy did chase him, so after game you get penalised for chasing.
Right. Cool. All right. Well, I think that pretty much sums that up. Did you guys want to touch on anything else with chasing?
I think that's a good summary.
I hope so. I hope it's not confusing.
if you are confused, again, we're going to go through this stuff at Nationals, but it's good to get a good idea of how this stuff works. And feel free to ask whoever your more veteran players are at your site. I would imagine they have some experience with the rules and played previous Nationals before, so it's always a good idea to check in with your resident expert.
Look, feel free to ask in the comments.
That too. So what's the next one after chasing?
Shielding. And here's where probably we get the biggest difference between competitive Laserforce and almost every other system is the quote-unquote show a shoulder rule. Because a lot of either newer players, people not familiar with the style of play, or especially players from other systems, they find this difficult to comprehend or say, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Why should I have to show my shoulder or chest when I'm taking a shot?
Yeah.
Well, there are reasons for that. We didn't just arbitrarily, invent this rule. And I can get into at least a little bit of history here because we did briefly experiment in the U.S. With omitting this rule, where you did not have to show an additional target. You didn't have to show your shoulder or chest. You could just go gun only. In 2009 and 2010, played this way. I was not a big fan of it. I spoke out vehemently against it at the time. Without throwing anybody under the bus, there were decisions that were made to get rid of that rule. We played with it, and it just slows the game down so much. It makes it static. It makes it so that you don't have the same sense of motion, and it also really gives you some perverse incentives to do other things, like get very good at a quick shot where you can still obscure the lights on your gun and be virtually unhittable altogether. At first, when we started doing this in Sacramento, it wasn't that big of a deal because most of us were still used to playing with the old rules. We moved around quite a bit. Most people were still kind of coming down corridors the way they usually would, and we're just kind of showing a shoulder by default. Well, if you don't actually have to do that, that's actually a really suboptimal kind of strategy. Really what you should do is just get around a corner and do pop shots as much as you possibly can. That provides the least amount of risk for getting shot and being able to shoot the other person in turn. And if you practice this, you can get really, really good at it. You can reference that old podcast about some of the Chula Vista players, like Gibby and some of the other players were incredibly good at these very quick pop shots. But for a number of reasons, number one, this really does slow the game down because it becomes really a defensive grind. Two, because Space Marines is a game where players have differing numbers of hit points, this has the default situation making the 3 hits even stronger than they already are, since oftentimes they can just get off shots that much more quickly than other people and not get put down than a scout or something like that who's coming in. And also, again, we thought at first that once the Gen 6 equipment had come out, that it was easy enough to hit the guns, so this other rule was redundant. Well, it turns out there are lots of things you can do, like hold the gun upside down, hold the gun in such a way that your fingers or hand are covering the front of it, that make the gun much more difficult to hit. So really
also
that
very
is
difficult to see as a referee.
Yes, and that's the other problem is that even if someone's doing this illegally versus illegally, it's very, very difficult for a referee to tell. So it virtually deletes shielding altogether.
That's it. But a bit of history on the shielding rule. It was originally created when Laserforce was helmet suits. So you wore a helmet, it had LEDs and IR emitters just across the forward part, and 2 at the back. So it was very easy to shield. All you had to do was hide your head behind a wall and you could look. So The guns didn't have hit zones. The chests didn't have hit zones. There was no back. That's all it was. So the shielding rule was created so that you had to basically show your helmet when you were trying to shoot someone because there was nothing else to hit.
Show your helmet.
Yeah. When it transitioned into vest suits in version 4, there was still only 2 shoulder hit zones. There was still no hit zones in the gun. They actually tried to introduce hit zones into the gun, but unlike the shoulders, which the IR kind of coned out into many directions, the guns were very focused. If you weren't directly in line with it, you couldn't hit it.
All you had to do was cover it with your finger, and you were good.
You didn't even have to do that. If you were 20 degrees off to one side, you couldn't hit the gun. It just didn't seem to work.
Yeah.
When Gen 6 came along and the hit zones came into the guns, then yes, as DK said, it could be easily hidden and not easily seen. And then you transition from there to your gameplay, your style. It does make games very static. Players just... I actually mentioned this in a podcast earlier where we were talking about the Nats. We went to Chula Vista. We played with it without a shoulder rule. And players started in their areas. They ran up to the towers, fanned out into positions, and just took pop shots. A very static style of gameplay. It was rather boring, really.
It's dumb.
Yeah, I'd again like to give another shout out to Sanch, who did come to me in the middle of that week. This is as I recall it. I could be off on this memory, but Sanch basically said, "This is silly. Can we bring back the international rule? If I'm hosting next year as the site administrator, can I just make an executive decision to say we're playing by the international rules?" I don't know if I really had the grounds to tell him yes, but I definitely said yes, because by the end of that week, I literally was at the point where I said I was not going to play another Laserforce comp if we did not go back to proper international rules, because it was just awful and boring.
And it seemingly has killed the Chula Vista attendance for nationals, but
unfortunately, yes, and a lot of those guys I think were still very good players.
Absolutely.
And would have been very good players even if they had played by international rules.
Yeah.
They weren't so reliant on that. It's not as though they didn't have other good skills in the game, but it wasn't the game they prefer to play. Which, I mean, Rusty said in a previous episode, if that's how you like to play, that's totally fine. But I am not part of that group.
Yeah. But I mean, we lost one site, but really it helped with the expansion of the Australasian teams into North America. So,
for sure,
yeah, for
sure, and it's at least created a standard by which the international community can agree on a set of rules and the way that the game, quote unquote, should be played under optimal conditions. Because that really is, I think, what makes Space Marines so much more fun. Is it does have that kind of movement dynamic, that sense of motion to the game, teams taking positions and then losing them, having to migrate around to other areas of the field. If you look at competitive laser tag in most other systems, whether it's Zone or Laser Quest or QZR or something like that, the style of play looks very different. It's largely people kind of dogfighting in small areas, which again, if that's what you like to do, that's totally fine. I'm not knocking that if that's the kind of game that you like, but I much prefer the way that we play, and I don't think you get that without the shielding rule.
Right.
Yeah, and there's also even with the shielding rule, you still have an advantage as a player in a static position. You have to show a shoulder to anyone that you are attempting to shoot at. But if you're in a static position and someone is approaching you, you still are the one choosing the moment to take the shot. Even if you're not popping a gun around the corner to do that, you're still the one who is in the box seat when it comes to actually taking that shot.
Yep.
So there is still lots to be gained from taking a static position in Space Marine, such as defending your resupply and being able to hold and defend it. You're not just sticking yourself out in the open and saying, here, everybody, tag me before I take another 2 seconds to kind of just kneel down again and get out of the way. You can pop up and pop back down again, and if you're quick, you can do it as quick as a pop shot and still show a shoulder.
Yeah. I.e. Scythe.
But we had some former Zone site owners who've transitioned to Laserforce. One is Arnie Mars, who was from Rockhampton. I believe she's managing the Oakley site now, and another one was a guy called Wombat from Perth. And they came over to Brisbane and watched us play one night. They were visiting Laserforce. And their comments were, "We look very comical, popping up like Jack in the Box. You see this head, and the body pops up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down." And it's very difficult, I suppose, to understand from that non-Laserforce background why exactly we do what we do. It just looks funny, but from a gameplay perspective, it certainly allows for a much more open, free-flowing, attacking style of game.
And it can't look any funnier than the Than trying to battle Redneck Tech one-on-one using QSAR packs that he brings to every Nats. Complete with the extended Kobe Bryant lower jaw. You know what I'm talking about, Than.
So, so that kind of like brings us into the rule itself. Can you guys sort of?
Oh yeah, let's actually talk about the rule itself.
Oh yeah, that's right. There's an actual rule.
I mean, if you want to call it one rule, you can. But holy fuck, it's like a whole page of like legalese.
It literally is a page. Yeah. Because there are lots of there are little edge cases to it. But I'll let Peter handle this one.
Yeah. Well, the main part of the rule states that you can't target an opponent unless you have unobstructed line of sight to one of their visible hit zones. So this allows you to be standing over the top of a player who's crouching. You can see their hit zones, and you're able then, in those cases, to raise your gun to be able to shoot downwards on them, or you're sighting directly over your phaser barrel. So if you're just simply walking around with your gun in front of your face, if you're sighting directly down the phaser barrel and you get a lock-on tone, you should be able to pull the trigger. All right? Those are the cases of your reflected IRs, or any IR, really. But there's also an and to that. So you have unobstructed line of sight to at least one of their hit zones, visible hit zones, or you're sighting directly over the phaser barrel, and the point that's being targeted has unobstructed line of sight back to one of your shoulder or chest hit zones. So that actually comes back to where I said you should be able to take a shot. If you're standing out in the open, you get a lock on tone, pull the trigger. If you're standing in a window and your shoulders are obscured, but your chest is exposed, you can take the shot. But if everything is obscured of yours and you get a lock on tone, even if you can't see what you're shooting at, you can't pull the trigger because what you're targeting, whatever you're pointing at, doesn't have an unobstructed line of sight back to a hit zone of yours. So that's part A. You can shoot something if you can see it. You can shoot something if it can see you.
And by you mean your hit zones.
Your hit zones, yes. Shoulder or chest.
Okay.
So we're not saying that the gun is not a hit zone. We're saying the only hit zones that have to be visible are the shoulder and the chest. Right. The gun is not counted.
Okay.
All right, so that's part A. In part B says you can't block the hit zones of another target. So one of your own players or the extra targets, the def droid, the generators, etc., the neutral targets. So, you can't block someone else's shot at somebody else or something else. That's why there's, you can start to see now why there's more than one part.
Yeah. Okay. Really, part A is the only really complicated part. The rest of them are essentially you can't block sensors, more or less. But let's go on.
Yeah. Okay. So part C, when you're not trying to shoot back, i.e. when your suit's deactivated or when you've got no shots, you can only use your torso or permanent playing field construction. So basically, you can bend forward and run away, or you can hide behind a wall. But they're the only real things that you're allowed to use to block someone else's shot at you. So this obviously allows for you to hide behind a wall. You can crouch behind a low wall before you take that pop shot at someone by being the Jack in the Box.
I'm going to start saying Jack in the Box so much now.
Okay. Part D. Now, Part D starts to get into a little more complicated area where you're almost allowing some other things. So we got when you're not fleeing an opponent, you may not deliberately use one or more members of your own team to block an opponent's shot at any of their otherwise visible hit zones. Hang on, we're going to have to edit this a bit. A player, when not fleeing an opponent, may not deliberately use one or more members of their own team to block an opponent's shot at any of their hit zones. Okay, so Part D shows that you're actually able to hide behind your own team if you're running away from an opponent. All right, this essentially allows for conga lines running from resupply. So, yeah. So when you get, what you see a lot happening is that the commander nukes. The team rushes into the resupply to kick them out, and they run away, and they often just have a corridor rundown. How do you not call people for shielding when they're all running away in a big line? Right. You can only shoot the person at the back. So we did include this to say, look, when you're running away, you can actually just be this line of targets that it's quite possible to legally be shielded by a player who's behind you. Right. You must only be running away. But if you're not, you can't jump in front of one of your own players to stop an opponent's shot on them. So you can't stand in front of the medic. The medic can't hide behind you. If you're just sitting in
or the commander position, when he's pulling a nuke.
Yeah, exactly. You can't hide behind the medic when you're pulling a nuke. Hey, I've seen it done.
Yes, so have I. That's why I brought it up.
Okay, and then Part E. When targeting, firing, or attempting to fire a shot or missile, you may only grip the phaser in such a way that none of its hit zones, muzzle flash, or laser are obscured or covered. And that comes back to the Chula Vista style, where they were using their two fingers in the front of the phaser to block their hit zones when they were doing their little pop shots.
Yes, and this is just an extension, really, of the other rules, because although the phaser is not a visible hit zone in Part A, it is still a hit zone, so you can't block it with your hand or something else other than your torso or permanent field construction. So this just clarifies what you have to do. So that it doesn't specify that you have to use the quote-unquote stormtrooper grip on the phaser, but it does say that, yeah, you can't block the sensors on the gun.
Can't hold the gun upside down and, like... underneath your armpit and
or bend over and shoot between your legs.
Yeah, or that, yeah.
Or that.
Okay, so that's all. Again, when you actually go through the rule book and you read these, they all make sense. The only thing I want to clarify is with basically it's section A. So we often have the argument of the wall is closer to you than it is to me. Where does that?
We don't have that anymore.
Okay, we don't. That's not a thing anymore.
That's not a thing anymore. Under Part A, that's where the point that's being targeted has line of sight back to a visible hit zone.
Okay.
So there's no trying to judge who is closer to what. If I'm standing at a point and I point my phaser at a wall and I can get a lock-on tone, so long as the wall has a line of sight back to one of my hit zones, chest or shoulder, I'm legally able to pull that shot.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we got rid of that old wording specifically for that reason. Right. All you really have to do is just imagine some kind of line going back from whatever you're shooting at back to your shoulder or chest.
Okay.
Is there a complete unobstructed line or isn't there? That's really how easy it is.
And I guess
that's right.
Section B kind of that kind of covers instances where if you have your phaser covering one of your shoulder sensors. Is that right?
No, Part B is blocking shots on other players.
On other players. Is there a thing that covers that?
Shoulder, phaser over a shoulder. It still comes under Part A.
Okay.
So you can hold.
Yeah, I mean, if you're
shoulder, so long as one other shoulder or your chest is the other shoulder, or your chest is still visible.
Right, because I guess if you're coming around a corner and you can see gun over shoulder but nothing else, then they don't have unobstructed line of sight.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
And there are players who do play in that manner, bring their phaser up high and off to the right or the left, depending on which hand they're dominating with, and they'll walk around the corner with that gun over the shoulder. And that, if they're targeting an opponent, it's an immediate shield.
Right.
Yeah, this is the problem of, quote, leading with your gun, which is a common problem lots of players have, which even experienced players, including yours truly, got penalized for at least twice in the last Nats, because sometimes in the heat of the moment, things happen.
Okay, well, cool. That makes sense. Shoulder, kids, motherfuckers.
Keep your gun up.
Keep your gun up and show shoulder.
Yeah. Yeah, keep your gun up.
Get travel insurance.
Yeah.
We're just replacing the rule book with those two phrases.
Okay, so was there anything else with shielding that you guys think that we should kind of cover?
I think that's the main thing. I mostly really just wanted to explain the rationale and some of the history behind it, that it's not arbitrary, and yes, we have tried playing it other ways.
Right.
I just find that it promotes a very different and, in my opinion, worse style of play.
Yeah, and we got to see what it was like, coming from playing Nationals. I think True the Vista was like my 7th Nationals or something, and so all I was used to was the Australasian international rule set. So it was really disheartening to come over for the first time and have that kind of happen.
Yeah, well, for like the 3 games that you played, because you might as well have been in the hospital.
Basically unconscious.
Yeah, travel insurance kits.
Oh yeah, we forgot that has to go in the rules too.
Okay, so that brings us to the third of the big 3, which is blocking.
Blocking. Okay, so blocking, like shielding, comes under a couple of different parts, but they are fairly easy to disseminate individually. So part A, you cannot deliberately block a passageway, a corridor, doorway, so that an opponent is unable to pass, or that their motion is unreasonably hindered. So if you've got a narrow corridor, enough for 2 people to pass, you can't walk down the middle of it if someone is trying to come from the other direction and get around you. You have to stand aside and let them through. At the same time, the other person also has to give you the same grace. It's not down to one person. If you have the approaching person giving way, for want of a better term, they're standing off to the left, and the other person is running down or moving down the middle of the corridor, the second person can still be blocking the first. There's no particular this person in this situation has right of way. Everybody has the right. You just can't move in a way that you're hindering the motion of other players.
So this is why we all go to such great lengths to lose some weight before Nats every year. Make sure we get 50%.
Yeah, well, you don't want to be like Baden and Spoonie, like stuck on the long ramp in Auckland.
That would have paid real money to see them actually get stuck.
I think Al was standing there and saw it happen. Somebody was there and penalised one of them, if not both of them. It'd be amazing. Damn you, fat air. Okay, so that's pretty self-explanatory. Both players need to make an effort to move.
That's right. And Part B says the same thing. And a player involved with an opponent in contention of an area less than 2 meters wide must move to the side and draw their phaser close to the body. The player must make at least one half of the area available to their opponent.
Right.
So again, it doesn't show that anyone has a particular right of way. Both players must give way.
Yeah, and I would say on the occasions where this has been penalized, it's most often been under the rubric of point B here. And this can be basically a crime of omission of failing to get out of the way when people are trying to pass.
So
that is certainly what I've penalized people for in the past. Of someone's coming through here, you continue to stand in the middle of the hallway, you're getting done for a block.
Right. So
that's right. And I was going to say a lot of blocking also happens when players are trying to create a path, so particularly on a nuke. So you'll have players in a resupply area hearing the nuke get activated. They'll start to resupply one another to make sure that they're deactivated and they can run out, create the path, turn around and run back in again. And you've got the opponents who are trying to rush that point to try and kick them out. They want to get in before this backtracking path is created. And there can be a mess of people in a corridor or a small area trying to get in front of them, trying to be in front of them. It can get, as I said, it can get quite messy. The players creating the path for the backtrack, they still have to give way. Just because their suit's deactivated doesn't mean that they are the ones who get to take up all the path.
Right.
And the players trying to run in as well, they have to make sure that they've got enough room for their opponents to either run past them or turn around as they try to get into that resupply point.
With the path that refers to, in Part B, where you have to draw your phaser close to your body, can you still attempt to shoot people like this?
As long as you're not breaching the shielding rule, yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so when you say that, if they're bringing their phaser close to their chest, how would they be, or close to their body? How would they be in breach of the shielding rule? What's a kind of typical scenario where that would happen?
I don't really see very many that would happen. As Tragedy mentioned, for Part A of the shielding rule, so as if someone is kind of crouched underneath you and you just kind of lean over,
right,
you're perfectly legal to target them. If it's an open hallway, then that's
you should be
pretty
fine.
Unlikely that that you're going to be blocking anything there. But yes, you can still attempt to take a shot. I don't see a situation where you could be breaching the shielding rule. So again, as long as you're in compliance with that, the blocking rule has nothing to do about targeting other players or taking shots on other players. It just says that, right, golden rules, you have to give 50% of every area that's less than 2 meters wide.
Right.
And another mistake that some teams will make, especially when they're trying to create their path in a backtrack situation, is that they will actually run out into a corridor side by side. They're both using up 50% of the path. They're both giving 50% of the path to the opponent, but at the same time they're not. And an opponent's motion is unreasonably hindered. So if you see backtracking where an opponent is trying to rush a resupply point, and they have to stop because there's a mess of players in front of them, it's quite possible that this mess of players, side by side, are actually blocking the opponent trying to get in, and you can penalise for that. You can be penalised for that.
So who would you penalise in that instance?
Well, if the player who's trying to rush the resupply point is to one side of the corridor, I would be penalise the person who's immediately in front of him.
Right, okay. That makes sense.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That is actually, that exact situation came up in, I think, one of the Sacramento leagues that we had. I don't think it was this last season. I think it was the season before that. But that exact thing happened. People both tried to backtrack coming down the narrow area at the top of the red ramp in Sacramento, and somebody was trying to get in using the outside leg. Well, I penalized the person who was clearly blocking the part of the path that the attacker was trying to get in.
Right. Okay.
So if you're trying to create a path, kids, stagger your lines. Don't be right beside him. Be behind him. You can still be on the opposite side, and make your opponent zigzag around you. Don't be side by side.
Right.
Keep your gun up.
There you go.
Stagger your line. Get travel insurance.
All very important things in the blocking rule.
So look how much we've streamlined this whole discussion.
Okay, so that's Part B. So Part C and Part D?
Part C, a player or a group of players may not surround an opponent such that they are unable to escape. I have had people look at that and go, how can a player surround another player? Such a thing's called dead ends. You walk into a corridor, they got two walls and nowhere else to go. I should say three walls, actually. It's in a U shape, and you stand in front of them. You've surrounded them using walls.
That's so threatening.
Yeah, you have that little, like, tiny supply closet corridor in the Brisbane maze. You can, like, tuck yourself into that corner.
I'm going to get you,
yes,
boy.
I don't remember what it's called, over by, like, the teleporter or whatever.
Yeah, we've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points that are like that in the Brisbane field.
God, you guys would never pass code in the US.
What do you run, a prison?
Under green ramp, under red ramp, an area we call the new cell. We've got an area under the skywalk, so it's in the skywalk corridor that runs to the bilge. What else have we got? We got the chapel, which is under the red tower, and we've got, I rattled off 6. Well, can't really count the bilge.
We'll leave it up to the Oakley players to come up with some more creative and appropriate names for those locations.
Okay, so don't trap somebody in a corner like a creep.
Well, Craig's team isn't playing anymore. I think we're okay.
And Part D?
Part D is you cannot deliberately move to block an opponent's motion or their attempted motion, but you can remain stationary provided you're not blocking parts A, B, and C. And that's covering essentially the area that's more than 2 meters wide. So open areas, large rectangular sections, blah, blah, blah. If you've got a player who's moving towards you, you don't have to move out of their way if it's wide enough for them to pass.
Right.
But you can stop. You can't step into their path, but you can stop and watch them go.
Right.
If they happen to be on the same side or moving directly towards you, you can stop and make them move around you.
Right.
Because it's greater than 2 meters wide, you're not blocking their path or unreasonably hindering their motion.
If you're familiar with basketball, this is essentially like a moving screen kind of violation, right? You can plant yourself, you can plant a pick, but you can't just keep moving in front of somebody to prevent them from moving.
I think is that everything on blocking?
Yeah, that's it.
It is. Yep.
Okay.
It's the least complex of the big three. Really, it's chasing and shielding that are the ones that require the most explanation, especially for newer players.
Probably the hardest to ref. I think the chasing rule is one of the harder ones to actually get right.
It is and it isn't. It's one of those things that what do you need to keep track of? Did the deactivated player go in this direction? Did someone chase them more than 3 meters and target them? That's the sum of information you need, which can be difficult sometimes to ascertain.
If you're in
I think for a lot of referees, the hardest part of the chasing rule is the fact that as a referee, pay attention.
Yeah, that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, make sure you're paying attention, you jerks. It's so frustrating when you're in playing a game and there's some referee and they're looking at the roof or looking at their feet. Yeah. You're just like, yo.
I remember being deliberately chased and killed out of a game in a competition in Colorado, I think it was.
We're not talking about that.
Penalized because the referee wasn't paying attention.
It's so important that if you are in the game refereeing, that's what you're doing. The community relies on each other to kind of make these calls and be alert, because it would suck if you were in a position where that was the case. Just as much as it would suck if somebody else was, not paying attention in your game. So it's kind of common courtesy. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have enough teams that the burden of reffing is not going to fall too heavily on anybody. So ref when it's your turn, pay attention, ref to the best of your ability, and you'll be given the same courtesy.
That's right.
Yep. And remember the non-standard Laserforce rule actually extends to referees.
Oh, yes, don't bring your fucking cell phone in the maze, you jerks.
Yeah, we've got all of those basically down. If you've got questions, put them in the comments.
Or, contact one of these guys directly. Because, I'm sure that over the years, both of you guys have had to field a bunch of different questions on clarification of rules. And, if there's any two people in the scene that kind of know their shit when it comes to rules, it's probably you guys. So, we appreciate it. So, the last thing to probably touch on is the dangerous play rule. Do you want to give us a rundown?
Well, dangerous play is a single sentence, and a player may not play in a manner likely to unreasonably endanger the safety of other players. Right. So the way you move through a field, the way you're attacking and trying to shoot other players, all comes under the bearing of dangerous play. If you're going to run away, watch where you're going. If you're going to run, watch where you're going. If you're going to run around corners, don't sprint. If you're going to shoot at someone, don't wave your gun in their face. There are some players that used to play like that. They would actually, when they went to shoot an opponent, they would sling their arms forward and then bring the gun down. So it was really weird watching it. It's like every time they tried to pull the trigger, they had to force it. And we're sitting here at Oakley because I'm actually doing that action with my hands, It's almost like they were holding their fingers still and pushing the gun forward onto their finger so that it would fire a shot.
Yeah, but that's how regular guns work, right?
I think I may have done a drunken imitation at Spectrum in 2014.
Yeah, that was your dance move, right?
It's actually the way Taipan used to play until I pulled him up and said, hey, you actually need to stop this. You're going to smack someone in the head one day.
Yeah, I didn't want to throw him under the bus, but I did call that doing the Taipan.
Yep.
You look like a duck. We had a player at Auckland Laserforce actually that like she was quite short, and she'd have her hands way up in the air with a gun pointed down at your head, and then she would like actually hit you with her gun. What are you doing? It was terrifying.
Yeah. When we say tag, you don't actually have to touch them.
Tag, motherfucker! Push.
You're it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the essence of the rule. So there's no rule against running per se. You just have to conduct yourself in a safe manner. I know there was a whole discussion in Brisbane about moving at quote unquote the speed of War Dog, or in the States moving at the speed of Scythe, I guess is probably the best analogy. Some guys can move quite quickly and still stay under control.
Right.
Other people flail about and look crazy when they're moving even at a relative walking speed. So
It can be a judgment call. The player is moving quickly. If he's in control, he may not be playing dangerously. But if it looks like he's really not got much control over what he's doing, then he might hurt somebody, and you need to pull him up. And a penalty is the first point of contact. Hit them with that. Get them after the game and say, right, this is what you were doing wrong. This is what can happen if things really do go wrong, and you need to change your style of play.
Right.
we'll just show them the picture of me missing my tooth for hard evidence on that.
Yep, and the video of you falling over in the back tower.
Well, that was just, for funsies.
It's a practical demonstration, kids.
Plus, it gave me like some epic YouTube content. So if you want to see that video, by the way, let me know.
Let's just make it the banner image for the tournament page.
I'm going to splice it into the intro for this video. That's probably a good place to leave it for this week regarding, the general rules. It's probably a good idea to come back and talk about some of the Brisbane-specific rules, which will, obviously be useful for everyone traveling into town, which is mostly everyone. But for today, thanks for joining me, guys. I appreciate you guys coming in and being great fan replacements. Appreciate it.
No problem. He got sacked after he couldn't handle the Scythe announcement.
Yeah, he basically went on holiday and has been missing ever since. So he's pretty mad.
Always a pleasure, Steve. Thanks again.
All good. Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
And with us, and remember, guys, if you've got a question, just put it in the comments. We'll be more than happy to get in there and answer the question. If you think it's silly, ask it anyway.
Yeah.
But always remember the extra rules. Rusty's rule: keep your gun up. GD's rule: get travel insurance and stagger your lines.
The last one, of course, is always remember to backtrack, kids. We'll see you next week.